Hey, it's Megan. I'm at the post office right now. I'm just having a decaf latte while I sit here to drop off a package, but I was thinking on the way here about something I was discussing with a client, and it's kind of a concept that I think is really an important and kind of like core foundational concept of fertility awareness, which is how, with fertility awareness, we leave behind what's called rhythm method thinking. And if you're not familiar, I'll kind of break down what this means. But the rhythm method, if you're not familiar, that is the fertility awareness based method of old. That's the one that was established decades and decades and decades ago. The rhythm method is, at this point today, considered largely to be pretty outdated, which I generally tend to agree with. I think in rare cases where these two things align, which is number one, the person would be okay with having an unintended pregnancy if they're avoiding. And number two, they do have cycle parameters that do fit within the requirements of the rhythm method. And yes, there are specific requirements actually. It's not just like a general thing that anyone would be safe to try. The rhythm method, again, it can work, I think, in those specific circumstances, but generally, I never advise people to use the rhythm method. I think there's a lot of drawbacks, whereas with an established fertility awareness based method that's modern, like a symptothermal method, which includes daily observation of actual biomarkers of fertility versus infertility, that is a totally different thing. The rhythm method, you're essentially guessing at when you're fertile based on overall cycle length and bleed information, like when you're bleeding. And again, it can work well enough sometimes for people if they're okay with an unintended pregnancy, and if their fertility goals are there in that lane. But for people who need or want to seriously avoid pregnancy, it's really, really important to utilize an actual established fertility awareness based method where you're not guessing, you're not going on general predictions, you're not going off of a general framework, you're going off of established scientifically based rules, based on the real-time daily evidence of your fertility biomarkers versus your infertility biomarkers, which change and fluctuate throughout your cycle in really direct correlation with what's going on with your hormones and ovulation and stuff like that. So what I really wanted to talk about, though, that's kind of just the general difference between FAM and then the outdated rhythm method, is the concept of like rigid rhythm method thinking that I find can kind of keep you in a box versus insightful body literacy that we practice with fertility awareness. So like, what's the difference here? So rigid rhythm method thinking would be something like this, where let's say you're charting your cycle, and let's say you're like 15 days into your cycle, and oh my gosh, like I passed by day 14. Shouldn't I have ovulated on day 14? Why didn't I ovulate? There must be something wrong with me. What's wrong with me? How have I not confirmed ovulation yet this cycle? I can't believe this is happening. Did something go crazy with my body? Oh my gosh. And as you can see, this rigid framework, it keeps you in the box of these strict expectations of your body that are unrealistic because you're not a robot. You're a human being and you're a mind-body system where things fluctuate, and that's normal and that's expected. So by keeping yourself in this kind of box of like, my body needs to meet these expectations or else there's something wrong, there's nothing wrong oftentimes. Like, it could just be that cycle, maybe you had a little bit more stress or something, or there's just a little bit of normal natural variation, and that's both okay. But as you can see with the rigid framework, it often just leads to more stress. it leads to kind of catastrophic thinking about the cycle, that something's like terribly wrong with you when really it's probably just like a normal cycle. Versus and I find that that can have detrimental effects in people's confidence with using FAM, because they may, again, have these rigid expectations, and when their body does not meet those rigid expectations, they feel like they're doing it wrong, or they feel like something is terribly wrong. Versus when we look at the insightful body literacy approach instead, there's much more just flexibility. So one lane is this rigid thinking, the other lane is this flexible thinking. And I find that the flexible lane of thinking is a lot more grounded in reality. It's a lot more accommodating to normal life stressors. And honestly, you learn a lot more from it when you're open to the variation and new things that can come up, as opposed to being kind of rigid and closed off and always expecting perfection, which is very unrealistic because you're a human being. With the flexible lane of thinking, what I find makes the difference is specifically using terms like, this is what typically happens in my cycle, or here's what usually happens, or here's what tends to happen, or here's what I might expect, but I'm also open to seeing how it unfolds. Like, I find that when people talk about their cycle in those terms and they use flexible language, that changes your thinking to be more flexible and more grounded in, again, the reality of normal natural variation of the cycle. And so I find that that flexible way of thinking, it is more relaxing for clients. I find that when clients exhibit that flexible way of thinking, they're more prone to pausing and saying, okay, here's when, I typically tend to ovulate, based on my past cycles, but, I know that that's not always going to be the case, and that's okay. So I'm just going to like sit back. I'm going to keep on paying attention to my biomarkers. I'm going to see how things unfold, and we'll kind of just wait and see. And so I find that by taking that approach, they're releasing this expectation, this pressure off of themselves. And they're saying, look, I'm a human being. I'm like a whole mind body system where things are interacting hormonally and my stress levels are affecting my body, and that's okay. And it's okay to release expectations and pressure of perfection on myself and open up to the reality that things are going to be in flux, and that is actually the norm. That's the natural variation, and that is in fact what's expected. I find that in that lane of thinking, people are much more able to accurately interpret their charts, because again, they're not looking at their chart like a list of a checkbox, or a checkbox list that, oh, everything needs to be just so, everything needs to be perfect, everything needs to be checked off, or else I'm doing this wrong. Instead, they're looking at the chart and saying, okay, yeah, I haven't quite finished my temperature shift yet, but that's fine. I'm going to see how it plays out. Yeah, my cervical mucus did dry up and I'm, maybe about to satisfy the peak day rule. But again, I'm going to wait and see how it plays out. I think it's just this release of expectations that really opens people up to thinking more critically about their cycle and being able to more readily interpret the signs and symptoms that they're seeing in real time, which I feel leads to more accurate charting overall. And really, I don't just feel it. It's like these are patterns that I've observed, over years of working with people. And I find that those who exhibit the flexible thinking, they tend to have an easier time with charting their cycle overall. So I just wanted to share that with you today because I think it's kind of a valuable concept that applies to fertility awareness. There's such a misconception that fertility awareness is just the rhythm method and that you're just guessing. It's not. It really goes beyond that. It's a different methodology. We're looking in real time at our daily biomarkers. We're actually observing symptoms. It's not just a guesswork based on overall cycle length. this is a scientific approach to the cycle that's very insightful. And we can learn a lot and gain a lot of information. So if this is helpful to you, I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below about your thoughts on this. If there's any other like tips or terms or language that you would recommend that people, utilize when they're talking about their cycle, I'd love to hear it, because I'm always seeking to kind of like expand my language and how I talk about cycles. I think that that's the key to all of this, like we're in dialogue with our bodies and with our cycles and with each other as charters. So I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Also, I am Megan. I'm a certified fertility awareness educator myself. I have an online course. I've worked with over 170 clients thus far in my practice, and I absolutely love it. I'm so passionate about it. As you can tell, I love to rant about it. So if you're like me and you're serious about using FAM for natural birth control, I'd absolutely love to talk with you. I have a free meeting that you can schedule. I'll leave it in the description down below with a link. You can go there anytime and set up a meeting with me, and I'd be happy to meet with you and talk about the course and see how I can support you if you want to work together. All right, everyone, I hope you have a great day or night whenever you watch this. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.